Thank you very much, Mr. Rafa. Thank you very much, our host here in Florence. One is awed actually in Florence, in the Palace of the Medicis, where, as Mr. Salvatore said, politics came from the heavens to earth, and we're trying to do the reverse. But it's questionable whether everything was really politics of God at that time. We in Iran have to tell you in Florence, but we have our own Savonarola, Mr. Khomeini. We have our own, some Ayatollahs who want to use the politics of God for benefits on earth, like Rodrigo Borgia. We have his son Cesare as the head of our Revolutionary Guard, his younger brother as the head of the Quds Brigade. The only thing we don't have in Iran is Lucrezia Borgia. We are really waiting for her. I was supposed to talk about international relations of Iran, but particularly focus on U.S. Ms. Harker will much more ably talk about Europe and Iran. But first I'd like to set the context in which the Iran-US relations take shape, the rules of the game in this new context, then talk about the specific issues between US and Iran, then finally what is the best that we can hope for and what is likely to happen, which is quite different from our best hopes. On the context, we live in a new world. Historians may come back and look at September 2014 as a time when an era ended and a new one started. The era of assumed, some say illusion, of unipolarity after Cold War. An era in which the assumption was that the great global powers can come together and solve the major issues and limit their conflicts to areas as small as Somali-sized and Iraqi-sized conflicts. The Bush administration actually came with that premise and that promise that global management is the way they're trying to solve the issues. I don't think that we can think of any president, perhaps since 100 years ago, Woodrow Wilson, to emphasize so much global cooperation in every speech that he made. That's over. In early September of 2014, NATO started changing itself from a global security organization, which it had gradually become since the end of the Cold War. Cooperation, Russians have a role, it's just general conflicts that we're trying to solve, to a collective defense organization again. It's a major change. Syria is another example. A year ago, when the clearly stated red line of Mr. Obama and the international community, use of weapons of mass destruction, is severed by, broken by Bashar al-Assad. Mr. Obama goes to St. Petersburg and eventually adopts the Russian formula for disarming Syria as opposed to military action. And the people in the United States applaud. The Congress was formed. Just a year later, 2 Americans are beheaded. He starts bombing Syria, and actually his popularity that had sunk from over 50% to 30% now begins to recover a little bit every time he bombs. This is how different a year makes. It didn't start September of 2014. It started with developments, with tensions build up when the international system no longer can contain them. Arab Spring, breakdown of authority in various places of the world, maintenance of centralized authority becoming increasingly expensive so that only the very rich can afford it. Anyway, at one point the earthquake comes, and that was September. Today, in solving the Syrian problem, no one in the United States would even think about, oh, how about the Russians? How can we cooperate with them? They are on the other side. What are the characteristics of the new system and the threats that they pose? In the new system, the borders between the two worlds that have emerged from unipolarity to a two-world system. These borders have a lot of tension. The frontline states on these borders increasingly seek alliances. They can't take all the tension themselves. Look at Poland, look at the Baltic states. Look at Iran. We'll get to what the implications of this are for Iran. But the deep states behind these lines increasingly don't want to share the burden, either of fighting or absorbing the consequences of the failure of the fights, immigration, etc. And therefore there is an inward politics. Look at France, UK, even Sweden, what has happened in recent elections. There's withdrawal. Even certain things that 2 years ago might have been looked as maybe just domestic issues without consequences, Hong Kong student demonstrations, today, in the light of the new context, may do a serious rethinking of the US 7th fleet, because those in China that hope that Hong Kong would be a positive model for Taiwan are eliminated from decision-making. Force becomes a much more important issue in Chinese-Taiwanese relations. And you know, the Western military strategy has to take into account. It's just a different world. The global management system of Mr. Obama suffers in the new world because it had lost the credibility of being interventionist, and that may actually ironically make interventions more necessary sometimes. Syria is a particular case in point, where lack of intervention in Iraq earlier on allowed Daesh and Syria, allowed Daesh to grow, ISIS, we call them, to grow, with the consequences that we see today. What are the impacts of this on US-Iran relations? In some senses, they're positive, because the US will see Iran as an anchor of stability in a place where everything is coming apart. Iran is not coming apart yet. There are common enemies, ISIS. But for those of us, for those amongst the allies of the United States who are afraid of this cooperation going far, Saudis in particular, Israelis, they don't need to worry because this cooperation cannot get very far. There are still so many issues of conflict, regionally, globally, between the US and the Iranian system. Aside from the ideology of the Iranian regime itself, where anti-Americanism is a center cement that puts together its security organization, its ideological oppressive apparatus. But, you know, conflicts in Yemen, they're on different sides. Syria, they're on different sides. In Iraq, even though tactically, in the case of ISIS, they may be on the same side, the US has not forgotten that the last time they coordinated politically with the United States in Iraq, the product was Nouri al-Maliki, which probably was the biggest reason why you may not have an Iraqi state in the future, because the Iranians helped install a system that lost the confidence of the rest of the forces in Iraq, even some of the Shiite forces. The nuclear issue is the most important outstanding issue between US and Iran. Again, this non-interventionist, accommodationist policy of the United States makes the United States look increasingly totally dependent on finding a solution, any solution, because the lack of it would undermine the Obama presidency on this issue. In fact, their plan B is only a declaration of defeat of whatever they've stated as their objective, namely reaching an agreement. And this reminds me of Ambassador Dubrynin of Soviet Union, who was the longest reigning ambassador of a major state in Washington, always used to say, the key to success in diplomacy is showing the other side that you're willing to walk away. And if you can't, if the other side knows that you can't walk away, you're in a very weak position. The consequences are that Iran, heartened by being a front state in these two-world new international order, increasingly gravitates towards Russia. They have a recent $70 billion agreement. Because Russia, that used to be a force for reaching an agreement, at least it always had that posture in the 5+1, right now does everything actually for there not to be an agreement, because it doesn't want relations between Iran and the United States to improve. Then it would not fit in its own regional strategy. As a consequence, Iran is heartened that it doesn't need a deal as desperately as the other side does. So Iran's posture in the nuclear negotiations on the most important issue, I won't belabor, there is not time to go into all the issues, but on enrichment of uranium itself, Iran's posture has been on my inventory. There's 3.5% to 20% uranium that I've enriched. I'm willing to make all sorts of concessions, but on my factory production capacity, I will not compromise at all. To this day, in all of these negotiations, Iran has not agreed to dismantle one centrifuge. This will not wash. Because even the Obama administration, no matter how desperate they can be, they cannot afford to sign a deal that doesn't involve reduction, significant reduction in the number of centrifuges operating right now. All of that brings us to the question, what next? In this new two-world system, which I don't call it bipolar because the other side doesn't have a pole, really. I just call it, rephrasing what Karl Popper said, open society and its enemies. That's the world system that we have. With 10%, max 15% of the population of the Earth, the open societies have a tough job. They have to seek allies in the unopen society. They also have to cooperate with the gray borderline states, like maybe Saudi Arabia, that are not so open, but at least are not enemies of the open societies. The only way they're going to win this battle of hearts and minds and have allies is to go back to becoming value-based, to stand up for certain values. This was the posture of the West in late Cold War years. Otherwise, if they're totally indifferent, this Islamic Brotherhood wins the elections in Egypt, who cares? We are for them. There's a military coup after that. We are for them too. This valueless posture will not cultivate the pillars of cooperation with open societies, in closed societies, something which this 10 or 15% of the population of the Earth, including Italy, desperately needs. This is the best we can hope for. What do we expect? The Obama administration would say, I've only got 2 more years, I cannot solve all of these problems. Let's try to put the best face on failure and call it continuous negotiations. Thank you very much.
L'ultimo intervento di questo primo giro è la signora Marigetta.